Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hello, Rush Nation, and welcome to the 5 Yard Dynasty Show. Week 5 is in the books. I can't believe how quickly the season is going, and it just seems to be an absolute wild season so far. Massive scores, underperformers, everything happening, injuries, you name it, it's been going on. So let's look at and see what happened in week 5. As always, let's start with the top scorers of the week. So at quarterback, QB1, Justin Fields with 33 points. He's put 2 back-to-back good performances in. Admittedly, not against fantastic teams. I'm really interested to see how things go moving forward. Obviously, last season we saw a similar thing where he was slow to get going, but really kind of from a fantasy perspective, had some great performances towards the end of the season. I'm interested to see whether this is kind of a similar trajectory this season or whether this is just 2 games in which we've seen great fantasy value from him. So really excited to kind of see how things go with him moving forward. QB2, back in the top 3 QBs again this week, Josh Allen with 27.8 fantasy points. Although they lost in London, he did give us a great fantasy day. QB3, Jared Goff. Him and the Detroit Lions have been doing some really great things this season, and it's quite nice to see him jumping into the top 3 quarterbacks from a fantasy perspective with 27.4 fantasy points this week. Looking at the running backs, running back 1, going back to that London game, Travis Etienne with 36.4 fantasy points. He really seems to be getting going now, and I think he hopefully will continue to be a running back 1 moving forward. He seems to have the majority of the work there. Tank Bigsby really hasn't eaten into his workload like we thought he would. Still think that Tank is a great kind of handcuff to have and a bench stash, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be getting enough work at the moment to be in any kind of flex value. Running back 2, he's done it again. Zach Moss of the Colts with 33.5. This is PPR fantasy points. So obviously, Jonathan Taylor back this week. The team had said that they'd be easing him in, but you can never really be sure exactly what a team means. But it turns out they did mean that they'd be easing in him. And Zach Moss got the majority of the work, and he obviously, used that and was really effective, especially from a fantasy perspective. So Zach Moss, running back 2 this week. Running back 3, really excited to see this guy back in the top 3 because I think this is where he belongs. That's Breece Hall with 28.4 PPR fantasy points. Again, the team had said going into this week, all kind of pitch counts were off and Breece Hall was going to be unleashed, and unleashed he was. He did have that really long run, which obviously contributed to his fantasy points, but great to see him back up there. Looking at the wide receivers this week, wide receiver 1, the guy from my team, Uno, Jamar Chase, 52.2 PPR fantasy points. Obviously, T. Higgins out this week. Joe Burrow was on a mission. The Bengals were desperate for a win. And who did he turn to? His trusty friend, Jamar Chase. And that meant he racked up 52.2 points. Wide receiver 2, fantastic evening on Thursday Night Football. DJ Moore. So if you had that Bears stack, Fields and Moore, you had a great week this week because he put up 49 PPR fantasy points. Really nice to see those two kind of starting to connect. And again, I really hope this is a sign of something to come, but I'm still not totally bought in on that Bears offense, and I'm kind of concerned that things might kind of start to go sideways again. But I'm going to watch this space and see how things go. Wide receiver 3, back in the top 3 again. He's really kind of putting it out this season. That's Tyreek Hill of the Dolphins. He put up 32.1 PPR fantasy points. Looking at the tight end position, I feel like this is kind of a top 3 from yesteryear, the last couple of years. Kind of feel like the elites are back in business. So tight end 1, after a 3 touchdown game, George Kittle with 27.7 PPR points. Tight end 2, Dallas Goedert. He's been really, really quiet this season, but they did say they wanted to try and get him more involved, and did they in this game. So he came out with 25.7 PPR points. Tight end 3, Travis Kelce, even though he did suffer an ankle injury, which we'll discuss in a minute, he did manage to come back in the game, score a touchdown, and he finished as the tight end 3 with 22.7 PPR fantasy points. So let's take a look at the big news of the week. Unfortunately, we have a lot of injury news this week, and some really great players. So that's really disappointing, I think, for a lot of our teams. So let's start digging into it. Looking at the quarterback position, Anthony Richardson, a promising rookie QB who was putting up some really great fantasy points. So the 2 games that he did actually manage to play from start to finish, he finished as the QB4 and the QB2. So really, really promising from a fantasy perspective. But unfortunately, he's suffered quite a severe injury. It's what they think is a grade 3 AC strain, a sprain of his throwing shoulder, and he is going on IR. So he's going to be out for a minimum of 4 weeks. So as a result, Gardner Minshew is taking over. Now, Gardner Minshew, I think we kind of know what he is at this point. He's a mediocre QB, but I do think that he can probably continue to support the 2 main pass catchers here on this team. Josh Downs has really started to come along, and I think Gardner Minshew will continue to support kind of his progress. So I wouldn't be too scared of Pittman and Downs with Minshew taking over. Minshew can sometimes be a bit hit and miss. If I have to play him in a super flex league, then I will play him as my quarterback too. But if I have other options, then I probably will take them. And of course, I wouldn't be starting him at all in a 1 QB league unless I'm really, really desperate. Moving on to a wide receiver injury, and this has got to be absolutely gutting for everyone. I mean, all of these injuries are gutting, and we really feel sorry for all of these players. But Justin Jefferson, one of the top kind of wide receivers, or the top wide receiver to go off the board in drafts this season, he suffered a hamstring injury in that game this week, and they've put him onto IR, so he will also miss at least 4 weeks. I think this is going to be a really interesting spot and opportunity for Jordan Addison to really start to get more targets and potentially break out a little bit on this team. Obviously, the other wide receiver of relevance on this team is going to be KJ Osborne. Him and also TJ Hawkinson, all 3 of these guys are going to see a bump in targets as they try and kind of make up for the loss of Jefferson. So they're a very pass-heavy team, or they have been. I'm interested to see now whether that changes a bit with Jefferson out. But I think, unfortunately, their running back room's probably not exactly how they want. So they probably will continue to throw the ball a lot, and that will mean more targets for Addison, Osborne, and Hawkinson. If I have Addison on my team, I am quite excited to see what he can do and whether we can really get him a fantasy boost. So I'll be keeping my eye on him over the next few weeks. We've had a few running back injuries this week. Gutted to see a few going on IR as well. So first one to talk about is James Conner. He suffered a knee injury, and they're going to be placing him on IR again, missing a minimum of 4 weeks. Now, last week when he went out, Amari DiMercado, so he's an undrafted rookie running back who came in. I think he was from TCU originally, backing up Kendre Miller. So he came in as the backup last week, and I think performed admirably really in the role. Now they also have Keontae Ingram there. He had a neck injury last week, so was out of the lineup, but he has historically been kind of their backup running back to James Conner. Now, DiMercado performed pretty well, and I think they could be interested to see what he could do. So I do wonder whether he kind of runs ahead of Ingram. Now, Ingram apparently is back at practice this week and may well be available for this week's game. They also have Damian Williams. He was on the practice squad, and they've just signed Tony Jones. So it's kind of a bit of a mix there of 4 different running backs, and I'm not entirely sure where they're going to go with this, whether it's going to be a complete split, whether Demercado is going to kind of get the chance to take this backfield and be the leader, not necessarily a bell cow, but maybe, a leader there. So I'm interested to see what happens this week. Of all of those, I would be most interested in rostering Demercado just as a flyer, really, because if he does do really well, then obviously you have him on the team. If he doesn't, you haven't lost anything. But because he is the kind of undrafted new rookie, I think there's a much more upside with him than with the others. I think we kind of know what we've got with the other running backs there. So Demercado would be the guy that I would be looking to roster. I don't know if I would necessarily start him this week. Now, that might be an error. But I really want to see kind of how things are going to pan out in this backfield. Another guy who's got a knee injury and going on to IR, the explosive, fantastic Deont Foreman. He has been doing fantastic things over the last few weeks, but yeah, unfortunately, he's gone out with that injury now. I think that puts Raheem Mostert back into that primary running back role that we saw him in at the very beginning of the season. Now, Jeff Wilson is also eligible to return off IR over the next kind of 10 days, so he may well be brought back up. And I suspect once he is healthy, he will run as kind of the second-rate running back in this backfield. He's been in this system for a while. They know him well. They obviously know him from San Francisco. I suspect that he will be that kind of secondary piece there. But there's also Chris Bucks and Salvon Ahmed, who are kind of waiting the wings now. Ahmed, he had quite a few touches in the first game or two, but he's kind of slowly been phased out, and it seems like Chris Brooks is probably the guy that's going to be the third stringer there. So if you're in a really deep league, might be worth rostering him and just seeing if he can do anything. But really, Raheem Mostert, which I'm pretty confident, well, I'm 100% sure will be already rostered in all leagues. Some people may have hung on to Jeff Wilson or dropped him with him being on IR. So if he's around, I would pick up Jeff Wilson just to see what he can do, because obviously it's an extremely high-flying offense, and if he can contribute, then he will give you some fantasy value. Another guy with an injury who may be going on IR, it's not confirmed at this point. He had a high ankle sprain. That's Khalil Herbert. Really disappointing to see that the other day. Seemed to get his foot caught. So it looks like he's going to be out for a good few weeks. Now, the next guy up is Roshan Johnson. Unfortunately, he suffered a concussion in that very same game. Now, that was on Thursday Night Football, so there may be enough time for him to get back and play this week, but there is a chance that he might not make it out of the concussion protocol. So the next guy who I would be interested in is Deont Foreman. Obviously, he's been on that team, picked up in the off-season. He was active for the first game or two, but then they made him a healthy scratch. But he's still there, and I think at this point he's going to be active. My suspicion, once everyone is healthy or Roshan Johnson is healthy, I suspect he will be playing as the primary running back with Deont Foreman kind of mixing in there in the early downs. So they both may have some value. I do think you need to keep a really close eye on what's going on with Johnson this week, because Foreman will, of course, be the starter if Johnson can't go. So I would definitely be interested in playing him this week. Tight end injury, Travis Kelce, really disappointing to see him suffer another injury. From what I can understand from Twitter and some of the doctors that I can see on Twitter, he appears to have a low ankle sprain. Obviously, he left and came back in. And he has been practicing in a limited capacity over the last few days. Obviously, they play on Thursday Night Football, but I think there's a high chance that he will suit up for that and play through it. But obviously, just something to keep an eye out on. Just before we move on to our stock up and stock down segment, just to mention, obviously, another week of buys coming up. This week, teams on the buy are the Packers and the Steelers. So obviously, just don't forget to check your lineups. Make sure you've got those players out of your starting slots. So let's first take a look at the stock up. So this guy has quietly been kind of playing kind of really decent football. And this is Brock Purdy, quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, coming into the season, Purdy was actually going as the QB 23 in startup drafts. Obviously, a lot of the concern we had was, had he totally got the QB1 spot there in San Fran. And then obviously the next one was this elbow injury. Could he start playing at the beginning of the season? How long would he be out? Would he have as much zip and things on the ball? Would he be able to throw it accurately following the elbow injury? Now, towards the end of the off-season, all the signs were that he was recovering well, and we obviously knew that he'd become locked in as the starter when San Francisco traded Trey Lance to the Cowboys. So he did start obviously in week 1, and I think he's played pretty decent ball through 5 games of the season. I don't think he's done anything to make them regret their decision. San Fran has obviously won and dominated every single game. From a fantasy perspective, Purdy has finished as a quarterback 1, so a top 12 QB in 4 of the 5 games played so far. So he's finished as a QB8, the QB11 twice, and the QB6. I do think he's basically a cerebral QB playing in the perfect system for him. We know the team is loaded, and I wouldn't necessarily say that he's carrying the offense, but I certainly wouldn't say that he's holding it back. For me, it's clear that he's going to be the starter of this team going forward, and it's obvious that he can navigate this offense at a very high level. So I do think that he's a locked-in starter for at least this season and probably the next few, and he's clearly able to navigate this offense and keep all of his amazing weapons kind of getting the ball and getting them winning. So I think he should be a high-end QB2 going forward, and I wouldn't be scared to start him on a weekly basis, particularly based on the offense that he is associated with. So after having him as a stock down last week, I have to mention Kyle Pitts. It really seemed like he'd been banished to the fantasy graveyard over the past 4 weeks. And as I say, I did have him in the stock down segment last week. Of course, he then went on to absolutely prove me wrong and make me look like a fool, because he finally showed some signs of life this week. He had 7 receptions and 87 yards. But unfortunately, that was still only good enough to finish as a low-end tight end 1. And that was obviously because he didn't get any touchdowns. He still hasn't made it into that elite fantasy tier, but obviously the targets and things in this game were promising. He had his highest number of targets on the season with 11. He had 7 receptions and a 29% target share. So these are all really great numbers, but you have to just take a look at how much he was on the field. This was actually the lowest amount that he was on the field this season. Now, the reason he's a stock up is because he's performed reasonably well in fantasy versus how he had been. I don't think he's 100%, and there have been lots of discussions percolating around that. But even injured, like, we do know he is extremely talented. I hope he'll continue to see the ball, but I am a bit nervous about his usage and how much he's on the field at the moment. Like, Jonnu Smith is on for more snaps than he is. If you still think that Pitts is, a guy that is going to be an elite fantasy option in the future, I mean, I do not deny his talent. I think he's supremely talented, but his kind of usage in this team has just not really been how we would want. And as I say, it might be because he's injured, but we know that Arthur Smith likes to kind of do things his own way. I think if you want Pitts on your team, even after this game, he is a buy low candidate. I do think that obviously with this single game, people might start to pique their interest again. If he puts together a few back-to-back games and you want him to sell him, I would do that at that point. I wouldn't do it right at this point because I still think his value is a bit low based on the beginning of this season. I think he needs to put together a few more good games before you can get true value from him if you would like to sell him. Ultimately, it's difficult to know which way this is going to go, and I would like to see kind of a bit more of his usage. So how many snaps is he playing? Is he going to be on the field more often? Beginning of the season, he was on 90% of snaps. Now he's come right down. And is he going to be targeted? And hopefully this is a sign that he's going to be targeted more, but we're going to have to wait and see over the next few weeks. Stock up. talked about this guy in the top scorers of the week segment, Ja'Marr Chase. So we did have a long discussion about this struggling Bengals team last week. And, coming into this week, actually, as a Bengals fan myself, I was kind of struggling to see how this offense was going to put anything together. They looked really terrible. Obviously, Burrow was injured and he was just struggling to get the ball out and throw, as we've seen with that amazing accuracy that he's previously had. But of course, they totally ignored everything I said and they started to turn it around this week. And of course, that highlight was the performance of Ja'Marr Chase. Burrow has finally started to look a little bit more like his normal self. And of course, with Higgins out, Chase was the main benefactor. He finished the week with 19 targets, a franchise-high 15 receptions, 192 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a massive 43% target share. Of course, that led him to be the PPR wide receiver 1. Now, I think his poor performances led him to potentially open up a buy window where people, particularly contenders, would be willing to buy him. I think, unfortunately, with him finishing as a PPR wide receiver 1, that buy window is closed for the time being. Now, depending on how the team progresses, if the team starts to struggle again, that buy window may well open. But for now, he's back where he belongs with the fantasy elites. So I think if you were looking to buy him, maybe at a very slight discount, you've missed your chance for now. But keep an eye on the team. They have been having the struggles. And if he starts to struggle again in fantasy, I might be approaching the Chase owner to see if I could buy him in exchange for maybe one of these older wide receivers that are performing right at this moment. Another guy that finished in the top scorers this week, he obviously has to be in a stock-up category because of his performance. That's George Kittle, tight end of the San Francisco 49ers. We know that he is an elite do-it-all tight end in this league. And historically, he was also considered as an elite fantasy tight end. And obviously, as we saw this week, he still can have elite performances. But this offense is loaded with skill position talent, which can make it difficult for Kittle to dominate and be fantasy relevant on a weekly basis. This week, it was obviously his time to shine, and as a result, he finished as the PPR tight end 1. But so far this season, he's either been truly elite or a tight end 3 or below. So at this point, he truly is a boom or bust fantasy asset. So for me, I think that makes him an absolutely fantastic best ball asset, because when he is elite, he's truly elite and he's giving you these massive performances which will give you, winning weeks. But when he isn't, he's giving you absolutely nothing. And as I say, that's great in best ball, but in managed leagues, that's an absolutely massive headache. If I'm an owner of him in a managed league, I would be trying to sell him off the back of this fantastic performance, because people love to remember how great George Kittle is and all of these elite performances, which I know that he is going to give us at some point in the season. If you're happy to know that he's going to give you either massive performances or complete duds and you're happy with that, then absolutely fine, keep hold of him. If you're looking for someone more reliable who's going to give you top performing weeks or high performing weeks every week, then I would be looking to sell him. If I could flip him for Sam Laporta, I would certainly do that in a heartbeat. I don't know how easy that would be, but that would be the kind of thing that I would be looking to do. So let's take a look at the players that, unfortunately, their stock seems to be trending downwards. The first guy we just have to mention is Ramondre Stevenson, running back of the New England Patriots. The Patriots have been an absolute fantasy disaster for the past 2 seasons. The only shining light last season was, of course, Ramondre. And going into this season, he was the only Patriots player that people had kind of any expectations of. Unfortunately, the Patriots have been even more woeful this season, and Ramondre has struggled. He's currently on the season PPR running back 27. Last season, he finished the season as PPR running back 9. Unfortunately, there's quite a few he's much less efficient. He's currently averaging 2.8 yards per carry, and he's broken off no big runs at all. Last season, he averaged 4.8 yards per carry and broke off 27 big runs. So by now, he should have broken off a couple of big runs, but he just doesn't seem to be able to or have done that this season. He's actually got a lower yards per carry than Zeke this season, who's currently got a 3.8 yards per carry. He's also got a rush EPA of minus 20.2. This is actually the third worst in the league. The other thing that's kind of holding him back is that he has much less involvement in the receiving game this season. So his receptions per game played has dropped from 4.0 last season to 2.4 this season. And his target shares also dropped from 17.3, which is really good for a running back, to 9.8%, which is really quite low. So at the moment, I just don't see how he's going to be giving us the value which we drafted him for, because he was being drafted as a top 12 running back in startup drafts this summer. And I just don't see any way that he's going to finish as a running back one this season. If you've got him on your team, he has to be a hold, because you're not going to get the value for him at this time because his stock is down. I'm not sure that I would recommend him as a buy low candidate either at this point. I think I would want to see a little bit more from him and the offense before I do that. If we start to see a few more signs of life, then I would be certainly looking to buy him, but I'm a little bit nervous that this season is not going to be a great one for Ramondre. The other guy that's stock down, his offense has also really struggled this season. That's Daniel Jones, quarterback of the New York Giants. Another offense that has been absolutely woeful. Although we did know that they played well above their talent level last season, things seem to have come crashing down faster than anybody could have imagined. The offensive line is a disaster. I know they've got some injuries, and it's also clear that the team have been missing Saquon, who's been out with his injury too. And as a result, Jones has just been having a really rough start. He had one great game against the Cardinals in week 2 where he actually finished as the QB1. But since then, he hasn't had a single touchdown in any of the other 4 games. In the other 4 games, he's actually been unstartable, finishing as the quarterback 29, 33, 25, and 23. At this point, I kind of feel like he's even barely startable in a Superflex league. If I had other options, I wouldn't be starting him at all. Until I could see improvement from the team. It may be in some Superflex leagues you have no option, but really I'd be looking to pivot as much as possible to someone else until we start to see a bit of improvement from this offense and some signs of life. A guy that I've wanted to discuss, because generally he was drafted reasonably high, but he's not been performing to the level that we were expecting. That's Jalen Waddle, wide receiver from the Miami Dolphins. We absolutely know that Waddle is a talented wide receiver. We've seen it time and time again, and he's on an explosive team. Before this season, he's been drafted as a wide receiver 7 in startup drafts, and I totally get it. He's a young receiver on a great offense. And last season, this offense ran through Hill and Waddle. But this season, I think the team is starting to get a bit more from their running backs. Obviously, we've seen that with Achan. Mostert's been playing really, really well. So the ball is being more widely distributed. It's not being kind of funneled through just Hill and Waddle. Obviously, Hill's been an absolute demon so far this season. He's just gone absolutely nuts, and there's no way he can be ignored because of how well he's playing. And as a result, I think that unfortunately that means that Waddle is underperforming from a fantasy perspective. He's just a little bit kind of the odd one out at this time. He's currently the PPR wide receiver 48 on the season, and his highest finish so far this season is wide receiver 19, which is the week when he got his first touchdown of the season. The talent is absolutely there, but Waddle is just not quite doing it for fantasy at the moment. I do think this could open a buy low opportunity for you if you're interested in rostering Waddle. So I would go and find out who owns him, and if it's a contender, I'd be looking to see if I could get hold of him. The next guy I want to talk about is Skymore, wide receiver from the Kansas City Chiefs. We've been waiting for a wide receiver to break out from this Kansas City wide receiver room for the past 2 seasons, and it just has not happened. it was thought that Skymore might actually be the receiver to do that, as he was entering his second season in Andy Reid's notoriously difficult offense. So he was drafted, relatively high this offseason. Unfortunately, just doesn't seem to be, he just doesn't seem to be totally clicking in this offense. Once again, Kelsey is the center of the offense, and Mahomes has then been distributing the ball out to his receivers. He's never been higher than third in the pecking order for targets, and he seems to have done very little with them. He's actually currently wide receiver 72 on the season and is completely unstartable. I think the most promising wide receiver in this offense is Rashee Rice, the rookie. I think there's a chance that he's going to start to get more and more touches. I think, unfortunately, any fantasy value that Skymore had in this off-season, based on kind of the hype and excitement of him, has unfortunately disappeared, and he's just not in any way fantasy relevant, and I just don't think you could sell him particularly easily unless you can find someone who still believes in him and might want to take a chance for a really kind of cheap rookie pick. So talking about rookies, let's go to our rookie watch segment. So which rookies have we been keeping an eye on and who's performed well this week? So I've got to start with Tyjae Spears. Spears has been quietly working his way into the Titans offense over the past 5 weeks. He's actually had a snap share of over 50% in 4 of 5 games. He's primarily been working as a receiving back, but he has gradually increased his rushing opportunity share this season. And last week he had a season high of 43%. This actually led him to have a running back 1 finish this week because he had 7 rush attempts for 34 yards and a touchdown and 4 receptions for 35 yards. So obviously that touchdown really helped him out, but he's really starting to work into this offense. Derrick Henry, clearly it remains the lead rusher in this backfield, but Spears has actually been the more efficient running back. I think he is an absolutely fantastic handcuff to have on your bench to Derrick Henry. And I think it's highly likely he is a successor as the lead running back on this team for next season. I think if you want to buy Tyjae Spears, the window is starting to close. So if you're interested in him, I really think you need to start looking to make offers now before either we get a Derrick Henry injury or he starts to work more into this backfield and people start to see and know exactly what they're getting from Tyjae Spears. So if you're interested, I would be going out to make offers right now. Another guy who performed really well this week, Josh Downs. Again, he's been quietly playing himself into fantasy relevance. He's primarily a slot receiver, and he's been actually second in target share on this team, only behind Michael Pittman in every game so far this season. This week, he actually finished as a wide receiver 17 in PPR leagues. I really think he's potentially going to be a bit of a PPR machine. At this point, I'm not sure he's consistent enough yet to plug into starting lineups on a weekly basis, but I definitely think he's one to watch as he's now the wide receiver 2 on this team. And if we're starting to get regular, good fantasy performances, then I would certainly be happy to put him into my flex spot. Another guy who had a great performance this week, Jaleel McLaughlin, running back of the Denver Broncos. Obviously, he was an undrafted rookie who signed in with Denver in the offseason. Until kind of this week, he'd been playing a bit of a bit role in this offense. But obviously, Javonte Williams was out with injury this week, so he had his opportunity to have a more prominent role. I think he filled in really quite admirably for Javonte this week, and he did look like the more explosive running back in this backfield so far. This week, he finished really well with 9 attempts, 68 yards, 3 receptions, 21 yards, and a receiving touchdown. And I think that based on the way that he played, he may actually have played himself into a larger role in this offense moving forward. If Javonte is back this week, I don't necessarily think that he's startable, but you certainly want to keep an eye on and see what kind of role he's going to get. And obviously, if Javonte goes out again, he's going to be a great handcuff to have. So I think you need to make sure he's not on waivers in any league. Obviously, he's probably been picked up last week, but he may not, or people might be dropping him again if there's news that Javonte is coming back. So if he's there, I would definitely want to stash him on my bench because I think he is a good handcuff to own. So that is my rookie watch for this week. So we're about to head into week 6. Really excited to see what that's got in store for us. Thank you so much for watching and listening. You know exactly where to find us. You obviously can find the podcast on your favourite podcast platform. You can find us on X at 5 Yard Dynasty, and obviously the main at 5 Yard Rush site. And also you can check us out on YouTube. So until my week 6 review, have a great week. Enjoy week 6. Anybody going to the London games, have a great time. I might see you there. If you see me, bump into me, please say hello. Otherwise, until next week, keep rushing.